So how do you think fashion differs?
Uniqlo, probably people hadn't even heard of what Uniqlo is, and it is endless. The bias for action has to be extremely strong. Retail also, but it is dynamic.
So hi everyone, and welcome to this fourth edition of Blue Bites, the official podcast for Blue Cactus. In the beginning, I would like to thank everyone for the amazing reception we've had to our podcasts. And thank you so much for all the responses that we've been getting and all the love that we've been getting so far. This time, we have a very interesting guest, and I have had the pleasure of working with him personally. He is an experienced and seasoned leader with a demonstrated history of successfully leading many retail brands. He's an alumni of IIM Bangalore and graduated from IIT Kanpur. He also went to St. Francis Lucknow. Currently, he is the president and CEO at Snapdeal. Previous to that, he has worked in Arvind Lifestyle as the CEO of Unlimited Value fashion retail chain. He has also worked as CEO of Highcare, the mobile store, and the COO of Landmark Limited. If you have not already guessed, our esteemed guest today is Mr. Himanshu Chakrawarti. So, welcome, Himanshu. Thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast. Thank you. So, let me start this podcast with a very simple question. You've had a very interesting career graph, right? And I spent some time on LinkedIn going through your career graph. So, why don't you take us through it and share with us how business has changed from when you started to what it is now? Because I also realized you worked in an MNC earlier, and there were so many things. So, why don't you share with us your journey?
So on the retail side, so I started working in retail in the year 2000, and that landscape in India was quite different at that point of time. The interesting part was that there were hardly any national retail chains across sectors. So if you were to, and the ones who were there had very less number of stores, hardly any stores. So you had Shopper Stop, if you recollect, was the first one that came in, right? And then they launched multiple years later. They launched their Bangalore store, Margaret Road store. Lifestyle had a few stores. When I joined Westside, we had all of 4 stores. Fifth had just got opened. So everybody was at the initial stages. Pantaloons had some stores, but the real only successful store was the Gadiahat store in Calcutta. You had in the different segments again there was hardly anything. If you were to look at food, for example, there was Food World, which had some amount of scale, but nowhere close to anything. If Spencer's was there, which again didn't have much of a scale, but it still had some stores. If you were to look at let's say the coffee shops, you hardly had any. In fact, Barista was just a few stores. Cafe Coffee Day had some stores. So across segments, other than let's say the likes of Titan, which had and Tanishq, which had created some amount of impact in terms of the number of stores, but by and large, across segments, if you looked at retail, hardly had any presence in India. And the playbook was essentially unscripted at that point of time. So I plunged into a format which was private label. So it was initial stages of retail and virtually non-existent private label formats, right? And therefore, we were all actually learning in many ways from while we knew what was happening in the markets in Europe and the US and the formats thereof. But a lot of the work that happened in India in that period wasn't based on first principles. So everything was being solved on first principle basis. The number of store launches in a year were very few. Every year we would launch one store, maybe 2 stores. Yeah, in a bumper year we would end up launching 3 stores. That's the time which was very exciting times. You did everything when we had a let's say promotion going on or a sale going on. We would all land up to do the parking, we would do valet service, we would all land up to manage the tills, we would land up to do bagging, we would land up to do everything. Yeah. And there were so few stores, so we used to, so everything was. And again, to give you a perspective at that point of time, when we launched our Calcutta store, which was our 7th store, yeah, and every city we used to do the same, just as an example. We had the who's who of Calcutta who came in for the store launch eve party. So Jyoti Babu was there. Yeah, he was not the chief minister, but he was very big.
Yeah.
We had the chief secretary. We had all the fashionistas. The Dolly Roy. She passed away recently. She and her husband. The who's who of Calcutta landed up. And can you imagine the times that we were in? That for a store launch,
Yes.
yeah, the who's who of the city landed
It
up.
was such a big thing then.
It was huge. Yeah, similarly, when we launched our store in Forum in Bangalore, which was in Koramangala, the biggest, in
Yes.
fact, in Bangalore, in an obscure part of Bangalore at that point of time,
Yes,
Koramangala, where
yes.
the mall got launched. Again, we did this event, and it was high profile event with a fashion show, etc., etc., and who's who of the city, wine, cheese. Yeah, it is just a different era altogether. It's unimaginable that something like that would happen in
Today.
this age and time.
Today it's all SOPs, and you know everything is structured and it just opens. You don't even get to know in companies how many stores are open.
So it's a matter of routine. So there was a different era, and the good part was that since we were all new to retail, in effect, all of us had just gotten into retail. I think we all learned together. We learned all aspects of the retail business. In today's scenario, you don't easily learn all aspects of retail business, because if you join in, let's say, ops, you will only keep doing ops for years. If you join in marketing, you'll keep doing that for years. If you join in buying, you'll keep doing that. If you join sourcing, you'll only keep doing that. In fact, you will not get hands into everything. So that was a different era, and therefore all of us managed to get a good amount of learning in all areas of retail. So that's the exciting part. From the consumer point of view, while we were attempting at that point of time and in fact our tagline used to be for Westside used to be surprisingly affordable style. But then you had the most affluent sections of the city who used to come and shop, and surprisingly affordable style was quite good for them. And that's also because most of the international brands were not there in India. International formats were not there in India. Uniqlo, probably people hadn't even heard
Heard
of
of.
what Uniqlo is, and of course larger formats like Zara and H&M were very far away at that point of time. Mango had a few stores here there, but through major brands, just a few stores here there. And these were tiny, small stores, but not the big, large format stores that we are talking about. So very different era, very different times. And now, of course, we have got a situation where, as you rightly said, you have got stores opening left, right, and center. You celebrate the 100th store, and you celebrate the 200th store and the 500th store.
Yeah.
And you don't celebrate every store. People do in their own bit, but not as a big event. Let's say where everybody gets to know about it. So those were interesting times. Today is again very interesting time because the complexity of the market has changed. Competition intensity is very different, and very importantly, I think beyond the evolution of the customer on the fashion scale is the entire impact of the digital space, which is felt across all segments of retail today. So I think it's a very different landscape that we have, and therefore we see malls, we see all kinds of things that go along with it. You have
Many different channels.
micro influencers, macro influencers, celebrities, mega celebrities. Yes, it's endless.
No, I can imagine. In fact, I know there are a couple of things in what you said which I think our viewers will find very interesting. One of the things, and this is very unique. I mean, no one else has said this before, but you're absolutely right. When back then when we used to work, we got an opportunity to work in almost everything, right? And so we had a much more rounded experience, so to say, of everything. Now, because it's become so verticalized and people are specializing, it's not the case. So, how do you think, leaders of the future, how will they emerge? Because will they be like you? I mean, with that kind of very varied experience, or is it just going to be somebody in operations who won't really know much about buying, or somebody from buying who won't really understand much of operations? And you do see this struggle sometimes, in the industry. How do you think this is going to evolve?
So I think the interesting thing that's happening in line with what we in the terms of scale and size is that essentially we find that the current generation, the time span for whatever they're doing is shorter, right? And therefore, the learning opportunity that they may not get in that role when they're doing, let's say, a buying role, they may not get, like, for example, we used to have all buyers in the stores over the weekends, yeah. And now also they go, I'm not saying that they don't go. But at that time, it was an integral part in the very few stores, so everybody in the store knew them, etc. They would go and themselves, do the display all over again. Yeah, sometimes that could be messy, yeah. But having said that, in today's situation, what we find is that because the awareness of the people joining the industry is much better than the awareness that we had during our time. We also find that people are able to move from one role to another role quite easily. Maybe not in the same company, but they move to another company and they get another role. So you will find that a planner takes up a buying role, yeah, or you will find that suddenly the buyer takes up a role in an online marketplace, yeah, for private label or marketplace per se. So that ability of people to switch from one to the other in a shorter time span has also come in
Increased.
now. While during our time, or at that point of time, initial stages of retail in India, while we learned everything, yeah, this movement was fairly low because the number of stores that used to be launched is used to be very few. And if you can think of anybody, you'll find the same person would be there in sourcing for 15 years. You'll find the same person handling menswear who will join as a training buyer, become an assistant buyer,
Yes.
become a buyer, become a category head, etc., for 15 years. This would go on, right? So that has changed now because all these the time span has reduced. So therefore, I think it is playing out in a different way. In many ways, I think the managers that we see today are probably more well-rounded, more aware, more with it, also with digital understanding. So yeah, I think while the era was different, we were all trying to solve on first principles. Now a lot of it is not getting solved on first principles.
And just for our viewers, could you explain what first principle is?
Okay. Very simplistically speaking, let's say these are the two coffee mugs here, right? Now, I suppose don't know how to make coffee, right? Now, therefore, there is a coffee machine that comes in, yeah, and in that, then you have to select what you want out of that. And let's say it's not a very completely automated machine; it is a semi-automated kind of machine. Then I need to understand that different varieties of coffee are there, yeah, and then I need to also know when I press this, then will it come with milk, without milk? Will the two come together? Do I need to add sugar to it? Yeah. How do I upload the or put the pods inside? Because without the pods, nothing would come out. Yeah. Where do I get pods, etc. Now, this is I can discover this on my own. Yeah. Or I can actually today go because there are tens of thousands of people who've got these coffee machines. I can go to one of them, or I can go to a YouTube
Video, yeah.
of one of these kind of people who've done it and just learn it very quickly. So I don't need to do it from first principles.
Got it. So, I mean, that's thank you for that. So, if I remember correctly, earlier West Side was Littlewoods, right? And then it went on to, and you were there when Littlewoods was.
No, I came in when it had just become West Side.
It had just become West Side, but you saw the kind of transition, and you've kind of seen how they used to work earlier, or had an idea and how it happened. So, what are the difference you feel between how the international companies have operated, and of course you've had the opportunity to work with others as well. So, how do you think these international companies work on retail versus how Indian companies in retail are working? What is the difference, even today or even at the time that you experienced it?
So it's quite a different one. I think international companies have a specific playbook. Now, some of them have adapted the playbook to India. We see that more in the area of, let's say, quick service restaurants. We find it much more. The coffee shops, quick service restaurants. We find it much more. And it's quite obvious. You've seen the kind of adaptation that a Domino's has done. Even a Pizza Hut has done. Who on earth would have thought of paneer pizza, etc., etc. Right now, they have done. McDonald's is the best example in terms of how they have actually adapted to things in India. So by and large, we find that in the food and the QSR space, there's a lot of things that they have adapted as per the requirements of the Indian. Even Starbucks, from the chais and the snacks, I think it's ever-ending menu of Indian and price affordability that's coming in. They are also introducing a pico size in India for both cheaper and lesser quantity that we have. So that's the adaptation to the market conditions in India. But by and large, the MNC playbook is a global playbook, and for obvious reasons, because they've got set processes, they buy at a global scale, they think of the range at a global scale, etc., etc. And you are more familiar with it than I am. But having said that, so that's the playbook. Now, what happens with that is that if it is working with that playbook, it's great. Yeah, like for example, by and large, we've seen Zara and H&M have stuck to their playbook international, right? And it's worked, yeah. But we've also seen that the playbook didn't work out for Marks and Spencer in India. Playbook did not work out for Mango in India. Playbook did not work out for many of these other formats in India. Even the example that you gave of Little Woods, yeah, and when it transitioned into West Side, yeah. When I joined, there was a new expat head of buying who was supposed to join in. I think you know the name, Gary Newman. But before him was the lady who used to head buying for Little Woods India, again an English lady called Jennifer Greenacre. Now the interesting part, which is there, is that they did a fantastic job of the playbook in India. Little Woods actually, which is a very low priced format in the UK, in Bangalore Commercial Street, the who's who of Bangalore was so it was completely different TG, which was coming in into the store in Bangalore compared to what they had in UK. But I think the adaptation to the Indian scenario, for example, therefore there was a reluctance to have ethnic wear on Indian wear, saying that that's not what we do. Yeah. And then in the Tatas came in, and then West Side came in, and one of the first things that they said is, look, that's a large opportunity. And it went on to become one of the biggest selling counters, right, over the years. I mean, and in walked Madhu from Shopper Stop into West Side, and ethnic, even today, after I think 24, 25 years of ethnic wear in West Side, it is the strongest part of the offer of West Side. She has done a fantastic job, and multiple managers in her team and otherwise have also worked along with her and created that. But in terms of the look at what West Side would have been if it didn't have that early start and the strength in Indian wear or ethnic wear as it was created. So a lot of things in the playbook that the MNCs have worked beautifully well. But when they don't work, yeah, that's the time that they find it quite difficult to actually adapt to the to the requirements of the local market. True, absolutely true. So the other question that I had for you is, you've seen retail in multiple industries. In fact, you used to head mobile store, if I recollect. Right, so from electronics to fashion. So how do you think fashion differs from the other industries in terms of retail? And I think this is a question which our viewers will find very interesting. Yeah, I think at the heart of the retail, if I were to divide it, right, there are two kinds of retail. There is the range-based retail, yeah, and the other one is largely product type-led retail, right? And the norms of the two are quite different from each other. I'll just explain. Um, in the case of product-based categories like mobile phones, or it can be consumer electronics also, but I handle the mobile. The number of SKUs is very limited. There may be a quick churn in the SKUs, which is okay, but because of the nature of the category that it is, but the number of SKUs at any point of time is quite limited. It's not a very large one, right? The choices essentially boil down to specs. It boils down to the price at which you are selling. It is very comparable in most of the cases, so you can actually compare A with B reasonably easily. Same SKU across different formats, of course you can. But even if it is two different brands, two different SKUs, कौन सा camera है, which camera is there, yeah, what processor are they using, speed क्या है, etc., etc. You can have a what kind of glass are they using. You can have a quick understanding of the feature set comparison and arrive at what you're going to buy at what price and make that call, right? Now, these are the categories where the primary skill set that you have that you require is to be able to handle this equation of explaining to the customers the specifications and justifying your price vis-a-vis the other retailers offering same or similar kind of SKUs. And you need to be able to do it at scale. All these categories work at scale. Yeah. On the range-based categories, they're completely different. They're completely different because in the range-based categories, yeah, every every style is different, every design is different, every pattern is different. Then you have the complexity of sizes coming in, you have the complexity of colors coming in within the same style in the same, and it is endless. And actually, the greatest understanding of that, of course, is or the cow, right? Uh,
Correct.
it's an insatiable need for or the cow.
Absolutely.
More. And that's, but you, as a retailer, you can't have unlimited amount of merchandise, because then you will have unsold merchandise, you will have markdowns, you lose money, you will have slow movers, etc., etc. So therefore, the categories lend themselves very differently, and there's no straight away comparison. Some of them would be socks, jocks, etc., but by and large, there is no straight comparison. The brands are different, the pattern is different, colors are different, designs are different, styling is different, fit is different, sizing itself is different. Some everything is different, yeah. And therefore, this is the first one is largely categories require humongous amount of science. The second one requires a good mix of science and art in managing.
No, absolutely. And this leads me to a very interesting question. I mean, I've seen you focus a lot on the operational aspects of retail. And but when you're training people to actually service consumers, how do you actually do it when there is so much that that person needs to assimilate and try and explain? How do you think it works very well in, and you've seen multiple industries, so what would your tips be to anybody who's watching in terms of what kind of things to do so that service in retail, particularly fashion retail, is very good?
So I think one of there are two or three key aspects that come into the picture, irrespective of whether you are in ops, you are in buying, any function actually relating to to this. Those two or three things which come into play. One is a very strong observational skill. It's very important. When your customers enter, do they look left towards the left? Do they look to the right? Is there a gender difference between who looks left, who looks right? What category, when you're experimenting, works best at the entrance? What category works best, at the back? What are the category adjacencies? It varies from catchment to catchment. It varies from format to format. We can always say kids and ethnic should be together, but there's no such formula-like mechanism, right? So one is to therefore have very sharp observational skills. Second is, as a retailer, irrespective whichever function you're in, the bias for action has to be extremely strong, because of the nature of the business that it is in, right? We ourselves know that if you change the layout of a store, if you change the visual merchandising of the store, layout of the store, same store suddenly starts getting you extra 10%, 15% business. 10-15% extra top line with no extra
cost,
expenditure
is huge
in retail can make all
absolutely.
Right? So many of those things, understanding that, observing it, bias for action, yeah. And then, of course, very important is the ability to talk to the customer and speak to the customer. Observe the customer and talk to the customer, speak to the customer, and understand what's going on there. So this actually is the playbook which is important. The other ones which are more more you can do it in a more determined manner, or more structured manner, is, for example, once you have done the visual merchandising, let's say of one store, right, irrespective of the layout of the store, with some modifications, yeah, can you replicate it in 200 stores, right? So that needs to be process oriented, right? Window displays that you may have for different parts of the country, you may have three different window display types, yeah. but that again needs to be done at scale and replicated, right? But the ability within that, even when you're replicating it, you will need to find the guys who've got that right understanding and the touch, that set of three mannequins, which is as you enter, facing you after, let's say, 10 feet or 15 feet. Yeah, those three mannequins, some of the people who can work magic in terms of what they show you there, and there are others who will just assemble some and put
And
there,
put it there.
while the process remains the same. So it's always this combination of science and art playing out in retail. Bias for action is important. If you've got, for example, for whatever reason, suddenly there are more customers, yeah, who come in. Do not wait to populate the cash tills. It is the most irritating part when you can see five cash tills and only one is being operated, and there are eight people standing in
Standing
the
in a
queue.
queue.
No, in the right minds, no customer is able to understand. Bias for action. You don't need to be fixated. Yeah.
On a process, yeah. If you if you see something, make it happen.
Yeah, and it should become a part of your process itself. It's a
Yes.
part of your learning. Saying that at times it can, you didn't anticipate it, but for whatever reason it happens. Yeah, but how do we solve this? And then, of course, retail also requires a lot of discipline and planning from everybody, whether it is the planner, whether it is the buyer, whether it is the store ops team, whether it is the back end warehouse team. Everybody needs to be extremely disciplined on the basic processes.
Yeah. This, I must say, anyone focusing is something I definitely know that you bring to the table when you actually take on businesses. Fantastic. So you're the absolute right person to ask, and I'll skip a question because this brings me to my next question. And you're so ingrained into retail; it's so much in your DNA, and now you're actually heading a online platform. So how has this transition been? What are the changes? What do how is this whole new generation business looking?
So I have always been very, enamored with all new technology that comes in. In fact, you will not find it anywhere in my CV, but I did have a in 2014-15. I did have a failed tech venture.
Oh
Okay,
yeah,
so
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was ahead of its time, or maybe we couldn't sell to the marketing properly, whatever be the reasons. But anyway, so that part was a great experience. But I have always had a great interest in technology, both consumer part, which is retail, but also very great interest in technology. Now, obviously, I do not have the same skill set that the new generation people in tech and engineering and product and data sciences have. I do not have those skill sets. They are specialized. They know it in depth. They know it much better. And of course, that's their area of specialization. But the entire field of this, the technology digital side is very exciting and very interesting, and I actually quite like it. Not now, but for years. That's also the reason, which is that, yeah, right. The digital in Arvind was
Yeah,
handed over to me
yes.
post the unlimited deal.
Yeah.
And that's because of the interest that I have in digital. Acute interest in digital. Then this was a great opportunity. Here's a brand which is very well known. Snapdeal is known across the length and width of India. It is going through its second journey, Snapdeal 2.0, and I love the founders. Yeah, known one of the founders for several years, Kunal and Rohit, of course, later on, but both founders. And I think the important part for me was in terms of uh, learning something new and co-creating with the founders the vision Snapdeal 2.0, executing it and making it happen. Yeah, and this whole journey of creating a value lifestyle destination for Bharat is something which is very energizing. So many things to learn. Teams which are fantastic in, as I said, product, tech, engineering, data science, allied fields, etc., etc. And the learning that you get. And as I said, I can't become an expert in those sub areas. Yeah, that's not what I can become. But there's a humongous amount of learning that happens.
No, no, and I'm sure this must be really exciting. But And you were in value retail earlier, and now of course you're so what I'm very keen to understand, how do these two worlds differ? I mean, managing a large retail business versus managing completely online space where you're not really interacting with the consumer face to face like you were saying, but you get a lot of data definitely. So how does that whole thing different? How do you? What I'm keen to understand is what is the difference really?
So I'll before I come to the difference, let me first attempt at the sameness.
Sure,
What is
sure.
same, and
Uh,
then I'll come to the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
difference. Right. What is same is you need to have an assortment. Yeah. Assortment obviously in the digital space is much larger because you don't have the physicality to the assortment that you need.
There's no restriction
There's endless aisles.
with the endless aisle, yeah.
So therefore, but there is an assortment. There's a logic. There's a pattern. There's a thinking that you need to have on the assortment. So that's something which is common, right? Second thing which is very common is pricing, right? Now, again, the pricing in the case of physical retail, where does the difference come in? The difference comes in that in both the cases you need to apply pricing logic, but in the case of physical retail, because of the physicality involved of changing the price tags, changing the system pricing in every place, yeah, and the physicality of everything, is quite static in nature, right? It's not dynamic. Pricing in the digital world is very important, but it is dynamic. It is algorithmic. It is elasticity based, real time, right? And therefore, there's a huge difference between the two areas. Then, if you were to look at again similarity between the two, there is the fulfillment. Fulfillment happens in a physical store, in a retail. Fulfillment here happens through the logistics team, which takes that parcel and it delivers to you. Yeah, and therefore the norms, the differences come in while the fulfillment is the common thing in both the cases. In one case, you do the billing, put it in a bag, and give it. In the other case, unknown to you, unseen to you, do the billing, tell that it is billed, yeah, and keep telling the customer now it has reached this location, that location, now it is in the last mile delivery center, it'll reach you today, and then it reaches and you get the packet and you open it. Yeah, these two, while the both are the same in some ways, they're quite different in terms of what you optimize and what you do, right? Last but not the least is the experience on the store and on the digital. So digital is also a storefront. Effectively, it's a store. It's a digital
absolutely,
store. Yeah. So the commonality is that you create experiences there. Yeah, commonality, but the way you create that is quite different. In the case of a store, I can't do anything different for Anindya versus somebody else versus somebody else. In the case of a digital store like ours, everyone has a different store. If you today open with Snapdeal, there are 5, 6 of us here. If each of us open, we can try it out. What you will get to see
is a different page.
Completely different.
Wow.
All of you will get to see completely different. You may have some commonality of the banners, but what you see underneath in terms of the feed and everything, even the banners would be different in most of the cases. Some commonality may be there, but virtually 80% of the real estate is completely different. You get to see, and it keeps changing. And this is all data science and algorithm driven. So that's the beauty of this. The beauty of retail is, of course, the physicality, the touch, feel, the tactile, the sensory appeal that you can have. So that comes in. So that's the beauty of retail. Yeah. But both are trying to create experiences. So there's a lot of similarity. There's a lot of differences, and it's fascinating. Both have their own fascinating things.
No, no, absolutely, and I don't know. I have never seen it being articulated so well like you have. Which brings me to a very interesting question. Now, I've always seen that retail is always plagued by uh, inefficient inventory, right? Because you're always forecasting 3, 4 months, 6 months ahead of season, making it, and then we keep going through these cycles where एक season में it really starts selling, and then everyone's buying, and then the next season it suddenly goes down, and everyone's saying नहीं 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 अभी माल नहीं चाहिए. Hold on, sorry, I'm on the other side, so I feel this more now. but on online space, people tend to buy large varieties, smaller numbers. It's more demand driven per se, from what I've understood it. So in the long run, is it more inventory efficient, the D2C space, compared to a retail business, or is it the same? Or do you feel as it evolves, will it become more efficient to do? Because here you're so much more prudent to the consumer, right? And the need to forecast to that level may not be. I mean, you can take bets on things that you really know are doing well, etc. Vis-a-vis in retail, where it's spread out over a large land space, you have 400 stores, and you really can't pinpoint at that precision. So, how do you think inventory is going to play out? Because that's, to me, a very big question. So, how these models will kind of play out?
So let's just break it up into two portions. One is, of course, the marketplace that we run, right?
Hmm.
In the case of the marketplace, our primary job is in terms of the experience on the platform, the post-purchase experience, etc., etc. And also is in terms of the assortment of what we allow on our platform and how we show it to the individual customers.
Correct.
In terms of the keeping the range with them, it's the responsibility of the sellers because we are a pure play marketplace platform. So to that extent, exactly the way the brands would do their planning, all the sellers on the platform are doing the planning. We don't need to do that planning for them. The good part is, of course, because they can see all our data real time. It's much better than anything else. However, our other business, which is the house of brands that we have, which is Telaro, where we have got our own brands, which we of course don't sell as Telaro. We don't sell on our platform because that's not allowed. But we've created it to be sold on the third party marketplaces like an Amazon, Ajio, etc. Now there the same thing comes in, but the primary difference, the same thing comes in like as you said, physical retail. So there are two or three primary differences which are there. The first one which is there is that we do not need to have disaggregated inventory lying at 100 different points. Yeah, we don't need that.
Correct.
Even if we want to do regional fulfillment and West, we need to have it in 4, 5, 6 centers. We don't need to have it in hundreds or thousands of locations. So therefore, your risk, and you know the risk goes down when you have in lesser centers rather than in a distributed network. So that's one big difference, and therefore you do not need to think of how do I move it from yahan bik raha hai, yahan bik raha hai. It's much easier.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Even setting of the logic where it will get picked up from, which location, depending on inventory, lat long, nearness, etc., is very easy in a digital space. It's very difficult in a physical retail space. So that's one key difference which is there. The second key difference which is there is that in the case of online, yeah, because of the endless end syndrome, when you think of creating a range in the case of the retail, you think of it as a range. So you think of, let's say, polos solids at 499. Yeah, sorry, I'm giving you price points to you, but solids at 499. Then you say, if I have got tipping on the collars, then I'll have it at 599. Let's say, right, 100% cotton. Yeah, and then as I add more and more and more, it'll go up progressively to 699, 799. I, depending on my past purchase customers how to buy, I will have 12 of solids. I will have, let's say, with the tipping, maybe another 12, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So therefore, I will say that the polo range would be, let's say, 40 options or 60 options or whatever number that you decide for your format. Yeah. And then you go in with that and you launch it, and then some of them do not change from season to season. The ones which keep running all the time. And then you buy for all the stores, 100 stores, 200 stores, 300 stores, and you put it out in the stores, and customers get to see the experience. Now, when you do that for digital, the problem is customers don't get to see it like this because there are tons of people in the marketplace place like us who are making sure that Anindya gets to see as a customer what he needs to see, not what the retail store wants you to see. So you will have one brand, one, it'll all appear random at different places and different times, and customer does not get to see the brand as you intended them to see. Unless and until the customer clicks on the brand store, but that's a very small segment. Even people who search for you by brand name, yeah, again will get the assortment not in the manner in which the buyer intended it, but in the manner in which the data science tells us to put it, right. So therefore, how you conceptualize the range does not at all play out on the digital format. And therefore, what becomes very important is the try and repeat formula, which means you reduce your risk by taking low depth, and because it's from a single location, it is good, or two, three locations, and then you actually spray it. Some of it will uh, catch up. Then you repeat those, and the others, because you bought small quantum, you'll give discounts, etc.
So
and
you'll
get
get
you
it.
that. And therefore you will get some of them which will start working. And the good part with digital is that if you ensure that styles which are working, you keep replenishment and inventory, the algos make sure in almost every format that they stay on top. So unless and until you do something strange of either changing the pricing completely or it goes out of stock, which then it will fall off and it will build again. Otherwise, if you ensure availability, it will be selling season after season after season after season after season. Unless and until there's a huge change in the pattern. So that's the plus point. It's actually far more stable than the retail world in that aspect.
In a very very interesting. This is so. I'm going to go a little off syllabus. So for everyone, we had a thought process, but this is very very interesting. So I have a question. Going forward, when newer brands are created, which will go on to become very large brands in the future, do you think they will be now is the time when probably digital first brands will start becoming big and eventually end up having a physical footprint? Or do you think existing brands will continue? Or do you think brick and mortar big brands will again continue to happen? Because when I look back in the last almost 2 decades now, whether in India or most of the world, very few large brands have really happened in the last 2 or 2.5 decades, right? In fact, a lot of new emerging brands are happening in online space. Very exciting brands are doing interesting things. So, where do you think this is going to play out? Because the difference in my head, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the people who are building digital brands think differently about inventory, go to market strategies, assortment, like you said, vis a vis how typical retailers tend to do. And to me, this is a very large difference in the way you approach it. So, people who are native to this kind of thinking find it difficult to adapt to the other, and so on and so forth. So, how do you think this is going to play out in terms of newer brands coming in? Where will they come from?
So let's first see it from the lens of the consumer, right? The consumer increasingly is going to do both. Is going to both shop online and also going to shop in the physical retail store. So that's going to happen and keep happening. So that's not going to change. Sometimes they will experience it in the store, buy online and get it delivered. Sometimes they will experience online and actually go to a store and buy it because they want it immediately or for whatever reason. Um, uh, Online, of course, the price comparisons are much easier. Selection process is an easier process because you can do it in your own room and do that. A physical store has the requirement for you to go there and then go to a section and see only of that store of that brand merchandise. So the consumer is going to do both. That is quite clear. It's happened in every geography. It will happen in India as well. Now let's look at the from our own lenses as retailers, manufacturers, brand owners, platform owners, etc., etc. Now the you find examples of people who started let's say as regular brands as we know, yeah, and they did extremely well on understanding this, both the digital and the retail play. One great example is a surprise leader in footwear in India. Right now, we all would assume that the global brands like Nike and Adidas, of course, Puma is also an international brand, but Puma India is bigger than all these brands put together. Yeah, it's a 3,000 crores. But the interesting part is not just 3,000 crores. 44% of that business is online. Yeah, and that is essentially because you had a leader like Abhishek Ganguly who took it into not getting constrained by knowing only retail or knowing only digital. He gave it wings everywhere that the consumer was going. Yeah. On the other hand, you have today morning we were at one of the sessions. There was a representative from Bata who was saying that we are trying to scale up the online presence and online sales and digital sales, and he said we have reached 7 to 8%. Right now, where is 44%
And where is 78%?
Bata, we all grew with Bata and Tata in India. All of us, it's one of the most revered brands in India. I think we've all grown up with Bata, and I think some of the finest people in the footwear industry in India.
Are
It's
from
a
Bata.
training school, right?
Yes,
But
absolutely.
having said that, organizations take to digital, yeah, or they don't take to digital, yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with your mental thinking and mental makeup, yeah. So, and the same thing is on the other side of the divide. People who are in the digital space, largely digital, yeah, they think because there's so much data, so much access, they can understand customers. If I'm able to sell something digitally, yeah, D2C brands as you're saying, they feel stores should be very easy. वहाँ तो कस्टमर आ ही जाएगा मॉर्निंग
हाँ.
स्टोर डाल देंगे तो कस्टमर तो आ ही जाएगा राइट
Mm.
यहाँ पे आई एम डूइंग कस्टमर एक्विजिशन एटसेट्रा but then it's not an easy exercise either. You need to have those skill set of running retail. So I think it's far more of the both the mental makeup and getting the right, kind of team members who straddle across both to make this work. Otherwise, it remains largely either or. And there are enough and more examples. I gave the example of Bata, and I gave a good example of Puma. Also, you have D2C brands who have not managed to actually make any headroads in retail at all. Yeah. So that issue is, but the consumer is going to shop both of these things. So ideally, in an ideal situation, whether you start from the physical side or you start from D2C or digital side, yeah, you need to have a presence both in the physical and the online space. No, no, I think very well taken. But I have another very, because you brought up this very interesting aspect where, consumers don't see brands now online, right? They mostly see the assortments which the algo is bringing to them. So going forward, and as generations pass by, and younger generations keep coming up, and they are more used to the online space than we are. I still don't buy online. Well, almost not. The question that I have is, how relevant are brands going to be? How easy is it going to be to create new brands, to create headspace? Because eventually you were saying, yeah, mere ko, if I'm buying polos, it'll keep showing me, the algo knows what prices I buy, it probably even knows which colors I buy, what size I buy. So eventually it'll give me an assortment that I want to see, right? When I start searching or I start looking. So how relevant are brands going to be in the future? Are they still going to have the same kind of impact they had in the late 90s and 2000s when when a Calvin Klein or a Stormy Hilfiger, whatever they did became fashion? Or is it going to be a lot more difficult to try and get consumer mind space? So I think brands are going to be important, but I think there's a democratization which is taking place, and that democratization takes place because of the nature of the medium, as you said. So when you look at D2C brands, right, and some of it was is quoted everywhere. Like for example, if you were to look at a Mama Earth, which is a digital first brand, or if you were to look at an HRX, which is a digital first brand, or if you were to look at a Wrong, which is again a digital first brand, and across categories, there are enough and more examples of brands which are digital first. Now, many of them have also managed to create a very strong brand, pull on the platforms where people actually search with their name, right? Or when in an assortment they get to see because of the name they end up picking. So brands are important, but I think at some stage or the other, many of the brands in the digital space struggle because they tend to commoditize their own product range. By commoditizing, I mean that when you take pricing as the only variable in your hand, yeah, in some way or the other. So the brands need to be very careful. If you commoditize it, then you are actually eating into the brand equity bank that you've created. Yeah, you slowly keep eating into it rather than making it grow. So brands need to be careful. There are enough and more examples of online digital strong brands. We've got Boat as an example in consumer electronics. Yeah, and a whole bunch of other brands. Noise is again a fantastic example of how it is in wearables. Yes, it's the biggest brand in India, right? And one of the biggest globally as well in terms of the number of units sold. So I think there is enough and more available for brand to be created digitally in the digital space. And digital space is not only on the platforms, but also the entire digital space of influencers, social media, and so on and so forth. the norms are different. One needs to understand that and create it, and also be careful on not doing things which can keep eroding from the brand. A lot of the brands which are not digital first, which coming from the physical world, actually are relying on the strength of this brand here to take them there, and that is something which is the one which uh, unless and until you do digital behavior, you will be eating into the bank over a period.
Well, this is very very uh, interesting. So I think we are kind of almost through, but I think we've covered everything. Just the last question that I wanted to ask you is the role of technology in the supply chain space. Of course, I'm doing this because, as blue cactus, that is what we do. But very, very interestingly, what we've been observing is that in the front end, there's been huge advancement on the technology, which is the warehouse to the consumer space, right? But actually, how do goods come into the warehouse? It is kind of in bits and pieces that there has been some work, but by and large, it's still pretty analog. Still, phone calls are made, emails are sent, even handwritten notes go, etc., etc. So, how do you? And this is the way we see it. Of course, we are trying to solve the latter problem. But my question is, where do you see technology heading? Where do you? And you can answer it from both ways, from the front end or the back end. And how do you think it is going to impact business going forward?
So, as you rightly said, see, actually, there are three core components of the technology, right? One is the digital interface itself, yeah, platform interface, which we covered before, so I'll not repeat that. And there's enough and more advancement in different things. We know the role of voice, vernacular, video. New customers are coming in, etc., etc. Other customers, yeah, and how you make experiences which are relevant for them. But your question is more towards non-platform related. One is on the supply chain side, and the other one is actually on the if I may use the term the logistics side of
Side
the
of the
of the of
business.
the of the of the scale. Now, the reason that you see a lot of technology which has come in on the logistics side is essentially because we have seen the ecosystem getting created from scratch. Lot of what you see today, it started off with the likes of Flipkart, Snapdeal, Amazon at a point of time, and then you will find that because there was no fulfillment mechanism that they had, yeah, so it had to be created from scratch. And as they started doing it, because these were all digital companies, you found a lot of startups which started to solve this problem for companies which could not afford to have their own large uh, you know own fleet or own warehouses, own mechanism, last mile delivery, first mile, mid mile. So therefore, we saw a whole bunch of the tech solutioning, warehousing solutioning, first mile centers, yeah, last mile centers, mid mile centers, warehousing, everything coming in to enable lots of other people who wanted to sell on these platforms as a solution. It started coming in, right? And therefore, you find in any of these spaces, I can read out from every each of those spaces, whether it is 3PL, from the deliveries of the world to e-com express to everybody, they're all new age companies. Similarly, if you were to look at the solution providers on the tech there, Unicommerce, Increp, they're all new age companies. If you were to look at, let's say, the warehousing solution providers, from the likes of Prozo to everybody else that you can think of, everybody is new age in every which way. Same with the last mile centers, people who do that, yeah. And therefore, all of this technology came in, solution providers came in, etc., etc. Now, this will become even better and solving will happen even more. There are still problems of returns, RTOs, systems not speaking to each other, it's not fully integrated, but there is humongous amount of progress that is taking place. It will become more and more seamless as we move on. Then we come to this side, which is the supply chain side, as you say. Don't forget that the supply chain side is essentially being run by planners, buyers, and sourcing people on Excel sheets all their lives.
True.
Yeah.
The bane of my business.
And I don't mean any disrespect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they know.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They know range very well. They understand merchandise very well. They understand quality very well. They understand fabric very well. They understand origin source of that fabric, QC mechanism. They understand all of this design that will work, customer, what's in fashion, what's not in fashion, how much should the range be, what will look good on the shelves. All this they know, but the actual work that they do is on Excel sheets. Yeah, and they have passed on this to the manufacturers, who are again exactly the same. They work exactly the same way.
Correct.
So this entire ecosystem is the one which works on either very Excel sheet or some very elementary rudimentary systems, or they go to things which are not really fully meant for that. And I'll not name any of them because that's not right. But some of the ERP solutions, which are anybody who has dealt with them would know. So from there being comfortable with pivot tables and Excel sheets, you put them onto an ERP which is doesn't make sense for them. There has not been a solutioning, and I'm not even saying full chain solutioning, not even subparts which have got strong solution in that. Because if you start solutioning subparts, somewhere
you will start integrating all together.
Together, right? So it's not really happened, and I don't think it's got anything to do with anything else. It's the users which are very different on this side of the spectrum from the users on the other side of the spectrum. So the two sets of users have been quite different.
It's the art and science also, I believe. The bare belief that, I do have that little thing that makes me different and my decision slightly better. So thank you so much, Himanshu, for this lovely, conversation. What I'd like to ask you at the end is, do you think I missed out asking something that you'd like to share with our viewers, and anything that you feel you want them to know, which you want to share with them? So completely over to you.
And there you've covered very important aspects of everything. But I want to just reiterate one thing: whether it is digital or whether it is physical retail or brand space, I think the next 5, 10, 15 years will, from the consumer point of view, be constant on some of the things: assortment, quality. These don't go away. These will remain
Always.
common, and these don't change from which medium you're on. Yeah, great merchandise is great merchandise, shit merchandise is shit merchandise. So that does not change. And I think as I think we are all operating in India, and we are all passionate about India, I think we will do a lot of great service to the country if we were to improve the quality of the merchandise at the mass end of the market. We don't even compare with comparable geographies, developing economies around the world. We are actually much lower in terms of quality in general.
That is very true.
I think that's something which we need to all put our minds together and make an effort. We do not need to, just because we need to sell at a low price, we do not need to sell poor quality stuff.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's very well articulated. Absolutely.
So, as always, pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in to this edition. And we really hope you like this conversation. Feel free to reach out to us. You want to ask anything of Himanshu, please reach out to us on our comments, and we'll make sure that he gets it and he can respond to you. Thank you.